Hello, welcome everybody. This is Neil with Portal to Ascension. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We have an amazing Friday night, and thank you for everyone on this Friday night or morning if you're somewhere else in the world, maybe Australia. Thank you for joining us right now and tuning in to have this experience, the story night, which is going to be the first that we've ever put together something like this. And the reason for this, if you guys didn't see, if you didn't see the email and the marketing to this of why we're doing this event, is that right now there is a lot of information out there going into the mainstream about the disclosure of the extraterrestrial presence, UFOs, especially connecting to the technology of what these beings are using, and even dubbing this this phenomena from the mainstream as a threat, even though all of the studies that they're really putting out there and all the sightings that they are showing us, there is nothing that really symbolizes that there is a threat at all. And let me just switch my phone up, it's making a lot of noise. And so the reason we put this together is that I've noticed in the last like 5 to even 10 years that there's been a lot of experiences coming out to conferences where they're giving their testimony of what has happened to them. They're owning what has happened to them. And now they're going out on the circuit to speak about it. And this is because this is a real phenomena that involves other sentient beings. So we're attempting to move the conversation a little bit away right now from the technology, and especially what the mainstream is dubbing this phenomena as, and move it into the experiencer, but also have a lot of fun with it, like have these experiences story nights, right? So we're going to start doing this hopefully routinely. We actually have 200 people registered for this event, and we only did put out one email and a couple of blasts. So just imagine what we could really do if we focused on this as a group meeting, like every month or something, and really we can relate to the individuals that are giving us these stories. Because I've seen multiple times random people at a conference, someone telling that person this story, and then all these aha moments about, oh wow, that's happened to me too, or that gives me some sort of context about what's happening to me. And since we have a global community, it's awesome for us to be able to do this, because there's some people in remote areas of the world tuning in right now that don't have the community or are completely like on their own to figure out what's happening. So thank you all again for joining us. We're going to have 5 experiences today. We may have a 6th. And we're going to have this individuals joining us is Rebecca Hardcastle. We have Jerry Avalos, Lauren Pritchard, Anara Whitebear and her husband Chris, and also Misha Johnston. So it's going to be a fun night. And before we get started, though, I just want to let you guys know that we do have a conference coming up. Portal to Ascension, if you don't know who we are, we produce at this point over 100 events a year, webinars, tours, retreats, conferences. Our main event is in Irvine, California in October, and you can check that out at ascensionconference.com. I'm going to show you guys just a little trailer of it really quick, and then we're going to get into tonight's presentations. Okay, so we're gonna get into tonight's experiencers. So our first experiencer today is Rebecca Hardcastle Wright, and I'm extremely excited to bring her on. I believe she was part of the experiencer conference we did with Janet Lesson a few years ago, but we haven't worked closely together yet. I'm hoping that we will soon, and she's a great person to start this out with because she's actually the founder of the Institute for Exoconsciousness, and the Institute's mission is expanding human extraterrestrial consciousness through communication and collaboration using psychic intelligence and cosmic consciousness to foster advancements in the arts, science, and spirituality. And earlier she was telling me that they are doing some things in Brazil right now. So I'm excited to see about her experiences, what brought her into this realm, and what is going on now. So Rebecca, please join us. Okay.
Thank you, Neil, and hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you this evening to share a little bit about my journey as an experiencer of ETs and multidimensionals, and also to share with you about the Institute for Exoconsciousness. And I'm just so pleased to have this opportunity. I'm what's regarded as a childhood experiencer. My experiences began about the age of 3. My conscious experience began about the age of 3. There are also crib experiencers and people that are in utero experiencers also, but mine just happens to be at the age of 3, which actually, when you talk to experiencers, it's a pretty common age. Before the age of 3, we're what's called precognitive, so we don't really, we're not conscious of all of our world yet at that point totally. So my early childhood was lived in a small mining town in West Virginia called Clarksburg. And I had 2 different distinct experiences at that time, but I do think that they were related. One of my primary experiences was being taken to Star School. So I was taken up in craft and met with different races, was given different instruction, learned different languages, was given some information about what I was to do with my mission in life, who I was, different people that I would work with, what I was to accomplish. And as I've grown into my experience, I've begun to see that I often regarded that experience as others. So there were others in the spaceship. There were other people mentoring me. My mentor was an other. And now I'm seeing that I have an integration with that in my consciousness, that it's not just other, but it's also was also me that was present there. And some of the mentoring may have been actually me and my cosmic consciousness or my past life consciousness or my seated extraterrestrial consciousness. But there it has become an affinity through time that it's not just an other phenomenon. The second experience that I had was West Virginia is a very porous place where I live. There were lots of mines. I mean, some of the roads you could travel on, you could literally hear echoes underneath. And I had an experience of childhood. I just want to frame that with saying that I was allowed a lot of freedom in my childhood. I ran free. I played all day long. I was out the door in the morning. I came home, maybe ate lunch, but always came home for dinner at night. And I had just great freedom to just run and explore. And interestingly enough, during those times that I was out running around, I was literally pulled underground. And I have a vivid sensory memory of my childhood being literally pulled underground, and then actually in a sensory way, after I met the beings underground, when I kind of explored what was happening there, then I was actually pushed back up out of the ground. So I did have a lot of underground experiences there with beings that are within another dimension of the earth that's carried me through my lifetime. I think some of that, as I've kind of integrated my contact, I think I've come to see that also as part of me, that maybe I came in as a shaman. I remember that sitting on my porch after I moved to Phoenix, Arizona, and I lived right off the Indian reservation. and sitting there reading a book on shamanism and just being taken by the fact that, oh my goodness, as a child, I was a shaman. I didn't know I was a shaman, but that was what I was doing. I was working with earth energies. I was working with beings in the earth as well as above the earth. And so my early childhood experiences were of that kind of vivid type. I met a lot of different beings during that time of my childhood. I always kind of describe myself as kind of like a Heinz 57 experiencer, because I've worked with many different groups. I've worked with mantis beings, reptilians. I've worked with hooded beings, tall whites, small grays, just kind of the gamut. When I mentioned the fact that I had ET contact as well as multidimensional contact, I think some ET contact is multidimensional, and as we begin to learn more about our multidimensional consciousness and how we move interdimensionally, and we have those gifts and abilities, we begin to encounter and meet with beings that are what I would call dimensional beings, interdimensional, extra-dimensional beings, where they're not necessarily residing on a planet as such, but they're in a dimension maybe outside of the earth, like a sixth dimension or a 10th dimension or a 12th dimension, that we can incarnate and bring that information into our lives that we gain by relating to them. So I have had ET and multidimensional. I've had angelic encounters. At one point, I was at a concert by a well-known man here in Phoenix. His is a wonderful name. His name is Harold Grandstaff Moses. And he does harmonics and resonance and has a choir that he has here in Phoenix. And I had gone to his concert, and I came home one night and was awakened in the middle of the night, and there was this massive light being, angelic light being, standing in my bedroom, bringing me information and talking with me. And I will be the first to admit that it was so overwhelming. When you read the accounts in the Bible of angels, sometimes they speak like angels, like come to someone's house to eat dinner, or different types of angelic. My angelic encounter was quite astounding to me, and something that I will never forget. So about 15 years ago, I was living in Arizona, living in a little town called Fountain Hills, Arizona, and that was actually just so providential for me, because I became friends with a woman named Ruth Hover, who at that time had run the longest running experiencer group in the nation. And I had the privilege of being a member of her experiencer group, and there were about 20 of us in the experiencer group. And she had one of these just phenomenal libraries that are like 3 books deep. So there was a front row, and behind that was a second row and a third row, and just shelves of books throughout her house. And she shared those with me and mentored me. She also worked with John Mack, and if some of you are familiar with John's peer group, PEER, that they were a group, a very small group of psychologists. John was a psychiatrist, counselors, very small group that got together, and they really paved the way for how to counsel and work with experiencers. And so that was a very, Leo Sprinkle was part of that group, if you're familiar with him. He wrote the book Soul Samples. And Ruth Hover really never wrote a book, but her work just influenced so many people. So I'm working with her, and then about 15 years ago, during that time, as I was reading and having so many experiences with, as I said, ETs and many multidimensionals. I did a lot of past life regression. I did a lot of hypnotherapy. I did a lot of recall about what I had gone through, and I was actually training as a past life regressionist and a hypnotherapist. So when you train for these certifications, you get to actually experience it, which is really wonderful. So you and your colleagues are trancing each other and doing past life regression. So I did that for quite a while, and then about 15 years ago, I was in bed. I was a single mom. I had kids, and I was laying in bed. I don't know if you remember those little alarm clocks that had the little, you could put the snooze button on the radio alarm clock and sleep for like 5 minutes, depending on what you had your snooze button set for. And so my snooze button went off, or first my alarm went off, and I was like, oh my golly, I got to get out of bed. I got to get my kids ready for school. I got to pack lunches, got to get them on the bus, got to go to work. All these things were running through my mind, and I was exhausting myself, in other words. So I just kind of went back, hit the snooze button, put my head back on the pillow, and I remember thinking, I just need to rest a few more minutes. But I was in that place between being asleep and being awake, where you're lightly tranced, I would say, but you have a lot of conscious recall. So you're not really dreaming, but you're somewhat tranced. And during that time, all of a sudden, this word just literally came in my body. This word exoconsciousness came in my body, and it came in as just a full body experience, I have to say. Kind of in the scriptures, in the Bible and different religions, they talk about that, the word became flesh. A lot of mystics and contemplatives and gurus talk about that. I had that experience of the word becoming flesh. And I took that word exoconsciousness, and I began to research it, think about how I would define it. Fortunately, at that time, Michael Salla was working a lot with how do we move ufology into being more academic. And I had come out of an academic background. I worked for universities. I taught in universities, and I'd worked with staff on the university. So I was very interested in moving in that direction. So he really gave me the first opportunity to talk about what exoconsciousness was in more of an academic way. So then I wrote the book, Exoconsciousness, Your 21st Century Mind. And as I did that, my experiences just grew and grew. When I published the book, I was out on my book tour, and which was very small, quite frankly. It wasn't really a book tour. I was just speaking in a couple places, and all of a sudden I got this call to come work with Dr. Edgar Mitchell and to work with his 0 Point Energy group of scientists internationally called Quantrek. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so glad that Neil's doing this tonight, because through Exopolitics, I worked with disclosure, and then with Dr. Mitchell, we worked very much with disclosure. Our work was with 0 Point Energy, consciousness research, as well as researching the extraterrestrial presence, because Edgar and all of us agreed that any kind of technology that we bring in this next phase of human advancement, human development, is going to have a consciousness component, I call exoconsciousness, as well as a component of consciousness and the extraterrestrial presence. And that in order to bring in these technologies, we need to experience and know about extraterrestrials. So as I worked with Edgar, I became aware of so many scientists that were experiencers, and they were bringing this high level science in, but they weren't receiving any support. And then I reflected back onto the fact that, well, when I was in Ruth Hover's group with 15 or 20 people, the group published something like 11 books and had 5 or 6 different inventions. And all of a sudden the light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, oh my goodness, I need to really work toward bringing these experiencers who are bringing in these innovations in all the technologies and all the sciences, bring them in and support them through an institute. So I was working with Edgar, and I don't know if any of you followed WikiLeaks, but we arranged a a meeting with John Podesta. I arranged a meeting with John Podesta for myself and Edgar to talk about disclosure and to talk about 0 point energy. And that meeting was to lead to a further meeting with Barack Obama. And unfortunately, Edgar had become very ill at that time and really couldn't travel to Washington, D.C., where I was living and working for Quantrek. So we had to cancel the meeting, and I didn't really think anything about sending emails to John Podesta and his assistant. I mean, they were very cooperative and very gracious. Just sorry that it didn't work out. And then a couple years later, around 2016, then a friend of mine woke me up one morning and said, you know, your WikiLeaks, all of your emails to John Podesta are all over WikiLeaks. And I was glad about that because it gave me a chance to blog. My blog is RebeccaHardcastleWright.com, to blog about Edgar and what he had done, to blog about what the WikiLeaks meant for disclosure and how important they were. And so even though it was a little disturbing, people calling me all hours of the night and whatever, it was still a fun thing. I'm glad it happened. I know some people in the US were upset about it. Other people were okay about it. For disclosure purposes, I thought it was wonderful. So as Edgar eventually became very ill and died, and I moved on and founded the Institute for Exoconsciousness here in Phoenix, Arizona. I began it in Washington, D.C. as a mastermind of a lot of my friends across the world internationally who were experiencers. We just got together and talked every month and about what we would like to do as experiencers, what we would like to accomplish. And then I left DC and I came back to Phoenix, and we're putting the building blocks of the Institute for Exoconsciousness together. We have a 501c3, we've got a board of advisors, we have directors, we have programs. If you're interested in knowing what we're doing, you can just click on my website, exoconsciousness.com, and I'll put you on the newsletter. We have a newsletter that goes out every month or two, but our focus is to bring the work of extraterrestrial experiencers who are experiencing both extraterrestrials and multidimensional experiencers, actually bringing their work to the mainstream. So what we're working with are experiencers who are scientists and people developing technologies, people who are inventors of any kind of product, people who are healers, people who are artists, people who are communicators, who are communicating in different ways. We have one project called the Rosetta Stone, which is all about star languages. And so we're just beginning. I don't want to have any misconception. We're just beginning, but our real our vision is that we're going to build together with groups like Neil's and Free and Costa's ET Let's Talk, different experiencer groups, that we will together build an exoconscious civilization where we are actually doing something. It's not just about having an experience and learning about yourself, which is step number one, but it's also about what are you going to do with your experience? Like, what is your experience leading you to? We very much are affirmative of the fact that experiencers co-create with extraterrestrials and multidimensionals, that we don't just receive the information, but that we transmit information as humans, and then we collaboratively co-create. And in that process, we will be creating this world that is something that on this planet is inclusive of both humans who are experiencers and extraterrestrials and multidimensionals. So it's a very, very exciting time. Another thing I want to just comment on briefly, when Neil talked about the To the Stars initiative and all the information that's coming out about threat, back in December of 2000, I believe, 17, when the New York Times article came out about UFOs and a threat to national security, we at the Institute actually wrote what I think is a wonderful press release that we sent out to all the press about the fact that it's not a threat, it's an opportunity, and really declaring that we ET experiencers were the vanguard, that we are the ones that are bringing the information forward. And one of the things that I maintain in my work with exoconsciousness is that it was wonderful during the time when Bud Hopkins and John Mack and so many different people were writing books about experiencers and explaining what we did. But 2019, 2020, it's a different era, and we speak for ourselves now. And that's one of our commitments as an institute, is to allow not only experiencers to speak for themselves, but also to have the support and the investment in the things that they're creating and bringing forth. So thank you for the opportunity to share my life and to share the Institute.